Good morning, everyone. My name's Jeff Burbrink. I am with the Field Crops Focus Group, which is the organizer of the biweekly crop and weather report that we do beginning in April, and we run those through September. Um, the purpose of these meetings is to give everybody a chance to get updated on what's going on in the field crop world, which would include corn, soybeans, wheat, forages, hemp, and we get a chance to hear from the specialists. So, our April first up today, we're going to have Tommy Butts.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Solid. So, I would say just since it's cold and wet and everything else, there's not a whole lot to discuss on the weeds front for the time being, at least. Main couple things I would say is hopefully when we did have that nice warm spell for a couple weeks there, we got the burn downs out for anybody that was going to try and plant early, just because we did have some good windows there. Right now, I hope nobody has their sprayer loaded and is trying to spray this week. I always like to say, at least 50 degrees consistently for about a week during the day, and we can't be freezing at night. Otherwise, pretty much none of our herbicides are going to work effectively on any of the weeds. So it's just kind of tossing money out the window there. So got to have some good temps where the weeds are actually actively growing. I will say I'm driving past some fields right now where it looks like a lot of henbit and purple dead nettle came up on us. With the fluctuating temperatures, it'll probably be another bad winter annual year, kind of like last year was, where we had a lot of the purple plants and horseweed or mare's tail again and that kind of stuff. So I think I just make sure that everybody's prepared for that, to have good solid burn down to take all of that out when it does warm up again. And then I think the last thing that I was just going to mention at this point is residuals. And so I would be, really prepared once we do come out of this cold spell, if everybody's going to be going full bore planting, to make sure that we have residuals on hand and that we're getting those laid down to stop weeds from ever getting out of the ground. So, especially stuff for giant ragweed, where ragweed's a concern, we have kind of started to hit that threshold where that really is going to start emerging as soon as we, just get even slightly warmer again. So that one's going to be coming on hot and heavy. Water hemp will still have a little bit of a ways yet, a few weeks before that starts getting hot and heavy. But for sure, if we're going to be trying to plant immediately out of this window, if we can get residuals down for things like ragweed and some of those other early emergers, that's going to be pretty critical to get ahead of the game too. So I guess the only other thing would be cover crop termination on that front. And again, you need the temperatures to make that effective. But really, once we get any kind of the warm weather, we generally like to say you want to start terminating that about 2 weeks or so from planting, at least from a weed science perspective. The closer to planting, the better for weed suppression, because the more biomass you can get. But if you're going to plant early, maybe try and let it go a little bit, get as much biomass as you can. But we normally like to kill it off at least a little bit before planting, just so we don't have any other issues with insects or diseases or other things from too much cover. So I think that's about all I have, unless anybody's got a question mark for me.
Any questions? So I think we'll move on to Austin Pearson with our weather update.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Many of you, especially down in southern Indiana, are probably flooded at this point in time, and I know the Ohio is supposed to crest and be the highest. It's supposed to be Thursday into Friday, so there still could be some ongoing flooding at this point in time, but quite a bit of rain that has popped out across the state in the last week, and even before then. I mean, we had some areas that were rather wet before, especially down in southern Indiana, which is the prolonged wetness that we've had down south all winter long, it seems, where northern Indiana didn't really get a lot of precipitation. And if we did, it was very light and not a lot to help alleviate the drought situation that we were unfolding in. And so stepping forward, I did want to do a brief recap of the 2024-25 winter. Most of the state was anywhere from 1 to 2 degrees below normal, so it was slightly a bit colder than normal winter. We did have a few really cold events, but other than that, it was just persistently cold with a few warm spells in February. But overall, still, most of the state about 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit below normal for the winter. Precipitation wise, it varied kind of pretty much wherever you were. So again, south of I-70, even south of Indianapolis, above normal precipitation, 0 to 2 inches, and even more, 6 to 8, 4 to 6 down along the Ohio, with lesser totals up in northern Indiana. You can see 0 to 4 inches below normal across most of the north central part of the state. So as we've been asking you all to do the continued drought reports. That's why we were really hitting that hard, because we had these departures that were still lingering across much of the north central part of the state, especially after such a dry fall that we had. And so that's something that we had to keep in mind and consider. And just to reiterate, winter drought impacts are very difficult to assess. And so a lot of what we were looking at were stream flows, subsoil moisture, and those different types of things to look at. One of the other bigger stories this winter was just the gradients in snowfall across the state. If I had asked and told you that the northern part of the state would be below normal and the southern part of the state would be above normal on snowfall for the winter, I would have laughed. And so that was the case. They caught some heavier snowfall events, especially December, January timeframe down in the southern part of the state, whereas the northern part of the state really didn't have a big one this year. And so that's one of the things that we had seen. I will say that up here in northern Indiana, we had a few spots, especially along the lake affected regions, that were up to 26 inches below normal for the winter for snowfall. So that's pretty unprecedented and really not that strong of a lake effect event so far, at least over the winter. And you can see this in our accumulated winter season severity index with the MRCC. We had a mild winter up in northern Indiana, and so this accounts for any of the accumulated precipitation and temperatures. Since we were lighter on the snowfall, these were a bit milder than normal. Whereas when you look at southern Indiana, we had several locations, especially Evansville, just south of Indianapolis and stuff like that. They were in the severe category. And I've got these Aussie scores for you to look at, and Jeff will send you all the presentation after the meeting there as well. And so the other big part of the discussion was that drought that pretty much lasted from the fall. We had extreme dry conditions up in northern Indiana where we had severe droughts, getting impacts of pond levels that are more than 4 feet below normal, stream flows that were less than 10th percentile in a lot of that so on and so forth. But extremely dry fall leading into the first part of dry December, and then we got wet. And so we got wet, but it wasn't like so largely above normal that we crept right back into drought into the February timeframe. And so you can see that large swath of north central, northeastern Indiana was in a D1 moderate drought. So 21% of the state in a drought category by February's end. So brief reprieve, and then it returned again. And that's just this pattern that we've been extending through pretty much all the way since last winter, where we get a rain event. And then because we've had these longer term departures build up, we're quick to dry out. And so that's something that we're hoping that this pattern that we just had broke out of that. But still, the precipitation outlook looks normal to slightly below normal. Looking at temperatures so far for spring, this would be March 1st to April 6th. We've been running above average on temperatures. That doesn't look to hold with this cold spell that we're experiencing right now. And we'll probably return to more of a near normal type temperatures with some colder temperatures possible in that third week of April. And we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. Accumulated precipitation, 6 to 8 inches in north central Indiana, 8 to 14 inches, heaviest precipitations along the Ohio with this last week's rainfall. hearing 8 to 10 inch totals with some isolated spots up to 15 inches. So very unprecedented rainfall event that we had down in southern Indiana. Accumulated precipitation percent of mean, most of the states above normal, which is why we're recommending to pull the drought conditions out of the state at this point in time. The modified growing degree days, I did want to say that we have had accumulations of units, 40 to 50 units down in southern Indiana, ranging up to 10 to 20 in northern. And comparing this to how it looks to normal, we have 0 to 10 units above normal on the southeastern side of the state, and 0 to 10 along the central and southwestern part of the state. So it's another way of saying we're pretty darn close to normal on these accumulations. And so that's what we've got. And we've only got 6 days, 5 days in this. And so next time that you guys come around, we'll have a better look, and we'll probably be tracking slightly below normal with that temperature outlook that we've got. I will say soil temperatures. We have had several days where the temperatures peak above 50 degrees, but the overall night changes, we get back below that 50-degree mark. So we haven't really had that 7-day average get above 50 degrees, except for extreme southern Indiana. So a lot of why you're seeing some of these winter annuals start to germinate. We do have these warmer temperatures down south, but slowly creeping northward is what we're experiencing. And then at the 4-inch level, we've got sub 50-degree temperatures for a lot of north central and southern Indiana. So still a lot of diurnal changes with those. But the biggest piece to talk about right now is just how wet things are. And it's really been fairly wet at the top part of the soil, but southern or the deeper soil content moisture, soil moisture content has been a little lacking compared to what we've seen at the top soil. And we just haven't had that deep penetrative rain that we've been needing outside of what we had the last 7 days. So things are looking up on the moisture front. And this is where we currently sit with the U.S. Drought Monitor. I sent a recommendation out this morning to remove all of this. My friends in Alexandria will be happy that the D1 will be gone from them this week. I was chastised for the Drought Monitor at one of their meetings here this winter, so that was a fun one to have. But overall, things are moving better and looking better on the drought front. Did want to say thank you all for continuing to report your drought conditions. There's a lot of counties that reported more than half this week, and so I appreciate everyone's continued support with that. And it helps us communicate the ongoing situation across the state. Precipitation wise, we do have some rain coming Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, especially up in the northern part of the state where we could see upwards of a half an inch of precipitation. The good news is it's not the heavy precipitation totals that we've seen over the last 7 days. So we are going to dry out a bit from that, and that looks to continue at least over the short term. 6 to 10 days, temperatures will be near normal to slightly above normal. Once we get to this weekend, we'll have more 50s and 60s return. But I'm not really seeing warmer temperatures than that, at least in the next 3 weeks from what I'm seeing. Near normal precipitation. So equal shots when we start getting those precipitation amounts with near normal conditions for the northern half of the state, the 8 to 14 days. That's the April 15th to 21st. After that 21st time frame, I looked at the GFS model this morning. If anyone does get a planting window, I think that the crops will be subjected to mid 20s for lows in that third week of April. So with the freeze and frost risk still at play for a lot of folks, I'd be real reluctant to try to hop out and get things going at this point in time. But obviously it's crop insurance and people can do what they need to do. But overall, I mean, I would be real reluctant to go. Equal chances for above normal, below normal temperatures over April, and that high above normal temperature or precipitation that has come and gone. So this is a slightly dated map, but this goes for the event that happened over the last week. And then the seasonal temperature outlook, elevated chances for above normal temperatures and elevated chances for above normal precipitation. So that's what we're seeing with that. Freeze risk won't really get out of here until mid-May, so that's something to take into consideration, but I'll leave it there if there are any additional questions. Thank you all for your time, and I will toss it back to Jeff.
I'm going to turn it over to Dan Quinn, our corn specialist, and see what wisdom he can share with us today.
Yeah, just from my perspective, nothing yet, but it's close. I've especially in the southern portion of the state, right, just very wet at this point in time. Farmers I work with and stuff are getting a little antsy in terms of planting. I know last year there's a lot of corn and beans that went in late March to mid-April, depending on where you're at in the state. Not so much this year, just with the amount of rainfall we've had. Big piece with corn, right, as we get to planting, and Shaun will probably touch on this a little bit, is if you have to choose between which crop, even with Shaun being here, I'm still leaning towards having those soybeans go in as the first crop, just in terms of what we've seen from trials we've done and collaborative trials, and in terms of also the tolerance of something like soybean to stand loss in a little bit more moderate planting conditions. Big thing with corn, right, is just paying attention to soil temperature. You'll often hear that the 50-degree mark is often that kind of baseline or line that once it gets above that, people will start to move. I tend to like it being a little bit warmer than that, or 50 degrees and warming up. Big thing with corn is just getting it on the ground quickly and getting it on the ground uniformly. And that just is a direct reflection of what the soil temperatures are, what the planting conditions are that you have. You can plant early and you can try to push it with some of these conditions and cooler soil temps. But you got to think about how long that corn is going to sit in the ground, right? If it hovers around 50 degrees soil temperature, that corn plant is going to sit in the ground for multiple weeks. Where if you are able to get to 60 and increasing soil temperatures, you can get that down to corn coming out of the ground in a week, right? 7 days, 5 to 7 days. If you can, easier said than done when you get in the spring and the conditions that we have. But big thing with corn is just getting it out of the ground uniformly, getting it out of the ground quickly. It just is not going to tolerate stand loss to the level of something like soybeans. It does not like when it has neighbors at different growth stages and you have competing with one another, and they're just not in unison when they're growing. So doing, again, easier said than done when you get into the spring and everything gets crazy, and farmers like to push it this time of year. But the conditions are just so critical for this crop, just in terms of moisture levels, temperature levels. Things can go wrong this time of year, and when those things go wrong, it just is something that just snowballs the rest of the year. When you think about root establishment and you think about nutrient uptake later in the season, you think about if we get into drought conditions and what that root health and root establishment is like later in the season. It's just something that if you don't get off to a good start, you're really setting yourself up to have issues through the rest of the year. So just taking the time, being patient. Farmers love us telling them to be patient when it comes to planting, but it's really, really critical for corn, right? We want soil temps that are above 50 degrees but increasing. If you're getting into 60 degrees and above, we want that corn on the ground quickly, uniformly. Checking your depth, right? Checking the conditions of the furrow, making sure the planter's set. All of those things are just so critical. If you're working with farmers or working with on-farm trials or stuff like that, helping just getting out of the tractor and checking the furrow, right? When the planter goes through, what's the depth? What's the condition of the furrow? Are you seeing any indications of compaction going on, sidewall compaction? The closing wheels doing what they're supposed to do in terms of closing those furrows. There's just so many things that you can be mindful of and pay attention to when it comes to planting. And we'll keep reiterating this point as we go through this month. But the goal is just to get corn set up for success the best you can at this point in time, right? And that's just a combination of, planter settings, conditions, temperature, moisture, seed treatments, the hybrids you're using, all of these factors, right, are going to be critical when it comes to getting that corn up and out of the ground and moving. So we'll just largely keep monitoring the conditions. As we often, as you see the timeline, if the rainfall continues, it looks like next week we'll start getting a break from some of this rainfall. But if it were to continue, right, a lot of times that's when we see mistakes get made as we get closer and closer, get into May, conditions start to kind of linger on us a little bit, then that's really when we start seeing mistakes made around the state. We'll see it, and if we'll start getting those calls a few weeks after that, those planting periods. But again, it's just being mindful of the conditions, what that seed is going into, where it's going into, what the conditions are really from a temperature and moisture standpoint, and doing everything we can to get that corn out of the ground quickly and uniformly. So really paying attention to those conditions this time of year is really, really critical. We've done some pretty preliminary trials with Shaun and myself looking at, planting dates, both crops side by side. A lot of indications that, thinking about soybeans going in the ground first. And, there's, Shaun will probably touch on this, but there's been that huge shift over the last 5-10 years. I know some farmers that'll put 2,000 acres of beans in before they even pull the corn planter out of the shed. So, but it really comes back to, what the tolerance level is for corn when it comes to stand losses and uniformity issues. In comparison to something like soybeans that can branch and compensate a lot better. So really paying attention to those conditions is really, really critical. Another aspect too is just corn acreage is up in the state. We're still trying to close that gap even better. Soybeans still a bit higher, but we need to work harder to get that gap or surpass those soybean acres. But I think we're 5.4 million acres for corn across the state, up about 4% across the state. You see that U.S. wide, right? Corn acreage is up. And another aspect is, just as you think about this year, stuff will be more challenging for farmers. They'll be paying attention a lot more to economics this year, being a little bit more precise on a lot of things they do, maybe reducing some things. So getting a lot of questions, probably, do I need this or do I not need this, or can I cut back in these areas or not? So keep that in mind as, prices being a little bit down, input prices, they go up and they never come down. So we always run into a lot of those issues as well. A lot of uncertainty too, and what things are going to look like and what prices are going to be. So I think in terms of, economics, that's going to be on, it's always on the mind of the farmers, but it's going to be even more on the mind of them when you get into a year like this. But again, big piece. I don't have anything major to update on because we don't have any corn in the ground yet. But as we get closer and closer, big thing is just conditions, right? Planting conditions, the amount of calls I get 2-3 weeks after planting and farmer says my corn looks like, 4-letter word. It often comes back to the roots, and it comes back to the establishment of that crop where they planted when they shouldn't have in many cases. So that's just being mindful of conditions, moisture, temperature, planter settings, all of those aspects. Starter fertilizer can help too. So all of those things kind of add to that equation of getting that corn off to as best start as you can. And if we get it off to a good start, that allows us to at least hopefully capitalize on conditions and management throughout the year. So that's just a big piece as we get into the planting season, hopefully soon. So be happy to take any questions or any comments if I missed anything.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have any questions for Dan? In my notes, I made 3 notes: conditions, setup, and patience.
Easier said than done every year.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Yep.
Dan, appreciate your help. And
Yep.
Shaun Casteel, our soybean specialist, and wheat, of course.
Yep. All right. We do have some news on the soybean front. It's too wet to plant, right? Too cold to plant. I got an email and text last week for some people that did get in that early window, and we have some cotyledons that and hypocotyls that were definitely mushy, brown, dead. So those that are in the ground, they're not looking too promising. As we think and we prep for what has not been put in the ground, seed rates always come to mind. I think about the market price that we have right now, 10-ish dollar beans. People can look at agronomic seed rates, and I'm going to publish one this week in the Pest and Crop. But in terms of, okay, agronomically, where are we at on a 15-inch, 20-inch planter, right? It's all about planting equipment from the work that we've done. And so if you've got a germ lot that's 90% pretty average, 140,000 is going to be great. 140,000 seed rate will be great. If you run a drill, we're going to up that up to about 175,000. That's all about establishment rates. That's about how many plants are you going to get in June and then by the end of the season. So that's the starting point for a lot of us with a planter versus a drill. If you look at the economics, again, I'll have all this mapped out this week with the Pest and Crop, but we can have probably about a 10 to 15,000 seed decrease with a planter based on our economic and yield levels. And then with the drills, we can cut back probably 25,000, right? So you'll have those details this week. One thing I do want to alert people, if you haven't heard this, contact your growers or put a blurb out there, use an excerpt from what I put out this week. But I've heard some germ scores are pretty low. I wondered if we were going to have this with how dry it was, how hot it was during seed fill last year, depending on where they're sourcing their soybean seed. 90% is kind of the gold standard. Here's a case, right? I'll downplay soybeans. We typically only 90% is really good. 93 is amazing. Corn, I don't know how you get 95% germ lots, right? But for us, if we get 90%, we're pretty good. What I've been hearing, there's some lots that are 80 to 85%. So it's not a huge. Most of the industry is not going to bring anything lower than that to market. But be aware of that as you adjust seed rates. Again, soybeans do have the ability to adapt. They do have the ability if they're pushing planting dates that are, soil conditions are 50 degrees, marginal seed emergence, and, we can still yield just as well at 70, 80,000 plants as 110, 150,000. But with that all being said, as we make plans now and moving forward, let's be aware of the germ scores that we've got. I dare say take one more step if you're aware or you want to write something on this to say that's our warm germination score, right? And so what that means is in ideal growing conditions, only 80 or 85% of those seeds are going to germinate, right, and behave normally. If we push those same seed lots on an earlier planting date, I dare say that most of those probably have some vigor issues. In other words, they don't do as well with cold conditions, wet conditions. And so if farmers have those kind of seed lots, I would make sure that I'm planting those in much better conditions. I would take one more step forward and say, can you contact the seed dealer and get extra information? Sometimes they'll have two other tests. One's called a cold germ. So then you can actually see how well does it perform under cooler, nasty conditions. All right, that's one. And then some of them actually have vigor ratings as well. So take the extra steps or have the growers take the extra steps to look at that. One other thing that can be done on these lower germ lots is to make sure that we've got good seed treatments. In particular, I'm thinking about the fungicide side of things. Insecticide, I really just don't see it within our Indiana or Midwest, the need for the insecticide seed treatment. I know Krupke's talked about this over the years with neonics and everything. In terms of the need, I don't see it, so that's cost savings. Go back to the poor germ lots that are out there and pushing planting dates on soybeans. A good fungicide seed treatment program is something I really want everyone to be aware of. And again, to know if you got phytophthora ground like we have over in East Central, if you think you got some Pythium type issues, to be aware and prepared for that. So a lot on preparations, a lot on seed lots. So now's the time to check and say, what are they at? Where are they at? If you don't have a cold germ, you want to get a cold germ, that can get knocked out pretty quick and even sent off. Okay. So that's seed availability, quality, seed rates. Let's see. if we do want to push planting dates, right, I do like to have late April, early May is the sweet spot. But again, we've got those areas in the years past that we can get into a mid-April planting. Austin kind of gave us a pretty good caution about the third week of April, and I agree, right? Soybeans can adapt. I don't like a lot of cold days, but they are definitely a little bit better than our diva crop of corn. So I do think that we have more of an opportunity to get the planters out there on the soybean front. If you're not familiar, risk management does have the planting date window, right? So the kind of the northern tier is going to be April 15th for insurance, middle central is April 10th, and southern Indiana is April 5th. So we're already past that point in terms of RMA. So those are some just good information to have on soybeans. I'm trying to think what else we've got. Tommy talked about some of the burn downs. Definitely seeing a lot of winter annuals out there. Think about cover crops. So just be aware of those. If we're pushing planting dates, I think most of you guys have had to heard me talk a few times. If we want to look at a sulfur supply issue, that's something to consider. So I'll be happy to answer anything on soybeans, wheat, as I understand. Again, what we've got, we're just kind of coming into jointing with a lot of it. Probably the biggest concern with a lot of the wheat acres is ponding, right? And how those saturated conditions are going to affect roots and survival of that. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Shaun.
Yep.
Did want to mention Marguerite Bolt couldn't be with us today. She did want me to say that we've got that if you have any hemp growers in your community that need help with their paperwork, their licensing, and their assistance filling out the applications, please reach out to Marguerite. She's willing to travel to the county to help them with the paperwork and so forth. And you could even use your office as a place to meet. So appreciate Marguerite being able to do that for the growers. Also wanted to mention that Elysia Rodgers, who is our ag educator in DeKalb County, is kind of filling in for Keith Johnson since Keith has retired now. And Elysia has a forage background. But she did mention that there is a publication that might be of use to some of our educators from Iowa concerning flooding of forage ground. I will put that link in the chat. And she also wanted to mention that it is about that time of the year that we would be starting to look for alfalfa weevil in the southern counties right now. So be on the lookout for that. Last year was a very bad year for alfalfa weevil all over the state. So let's talk to John Bonkowski concerning PPDL. Anything new going on in PPDL, John, that you want to bring us up to date?
Yeah, it's a little too cold. We've only gotten a handful of samples that are agronomic related. In particular, triticale or wheat. We have had some issues with environmental conditions, especially cold damage, or if there was any issues with cold soil, excessive water in the soil, leading to potential root rot issues that are going through, going from fall into the winter, and kind of as they're greening up now, they're having intermittent dying plants, or at least poor quality plants in the field. So I would say at the moment, we're just looking at environmental problems. Coming into the next few weeks, though, I would say I would recommend looking for any possible viral symptoms in wheat. While we don't have corn and soybean, think about our grassy little friends there. They have yellow and red foliage that can occur due to root rot issues or to cold damage. And so if you have red foliage, this actually can also be associated with barley yellow dwarf virus, BYDV. Yellowing of leaves and even spindle, kind of very thin yellow streaks in leaves, can be associated with some of the other wheat viruses. So I would just keep an eye out for some of those issues. I do have 2 older articles, and I don't know if we're planning on writing one or not for Pest and Crop, but I'll talk to Darcy when I have an opportunity. But at the moment, we have some older articles that have been put on Pest and Crop that I'll put in the chat that you can use to kind of keep an eye on.
Thank you, John. Any procedural changes that we need to be aware of for PPDL this year?
Nope, at the moment it's the same. So if you have any samples, feel free to, if you want to reach out, you can. I would always recommend take a photo of the situation first to send just for evaluation if you're not sure of what kind of sample you want to send, or just to get an idea of what might be going on. But yeah, nothing really has changed in terms of procedural stuff.
Thank you, John.
Hmm?
Any questions for John? Got a note from Ashley Adair. Ashley's got some words of advice on the organic front.
Good morning, everyone. So there are a few folks out there that have planted oats. So for example, up at NEPAC, Northeast Purdue Ag Center, one of our research plots includes oats in the crop rotation. So oftentimes you can plant oats a lot earlier than any of the other crops that we typically think of here in Indiana, because they can germinate in temperatures as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So oats are planted on a handful of organic acres out there. Folks had a pretty good planting window for that earlier in March. So that was planted at NEPAC March 13th. There are some examples of others planting around that time around the state as well. And they tend to tolerate wet conditions also. So hopefully conditions continue to be reasonably good for oat growth moving into the rest of April. Oats are a critical crop for weed control along with other small grains and organic crops because they can get ahead of some of the winter annual weeds that we might be dealing with or will be dealing with. So just wanted to provide a little bit of information there for those of you who have organic growers in your counties. If any of them are growing oats, those should be in the ground by now. Little bit on organic prices. So corn and soybean prices updated by USDA. We've got corn topping out at about $10 a bushel and soybeans topping out around $23 a bushel. Wheat is anywhere between $6 and $8.25 a bushel. So that's kind of what prices are looking like. Really curious and a little bit apprehensive to see what global trade and tariffs do to organic grain prices. There could be some short-term gains there, followed by long-term trouble. So we'll see what happens there. As far as corn and soybean planting, we are definitely looking at later in May to really get into that planting window since organic growers are planting untreated seed. So we really want those temperatures in soil temperatures to be closer to the 60-degree mark so things pop out of the ground quicker, but you do have more leeway, as Shaun mentioned, with soybeans. They're a little bit more adaptable. And we do have plenty of guys out there that are planting green or just kind of doing various planting practices with soybeans that differ a little bit from conventional. At NEPAC, for example, we will be planting some soybeans green into a cereal rye cover crop followed by crimping. If you're curious about anything that we're doing at NEPAC in terms of research, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Christian Krepke is actually the PI on the project out there, but we have a number of folks across botany and plant pathology, entomology, and agronomy that are working on that project, this organic research project at NEPAC. Also, if any of you have any questions specific to organic fields or scouting in organic fields, working with organic growers, talking about organic standards, don't hesitate to reach out. I am happy to help. I'm happy to take any questions now, or feel free to email me after the fact. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Ashley. Scott Gabbard, you're online. You have anything you want to share about Purdue on the farm?
Good morning. Two things, really. One is that if you were interested in Purdue on the farm this year and have not heard from me last Friday, please reach out to me directly either by email or my cell number, which is, well, I can leave that in the chat here in a little bit. The other thing too is that next Wednesday we'll be having a small training get together and also some supply dissemination next Wednesday at NEPAC from about 10 to 2. And Carl will be going over some planter setups, look at a drill, possibly do some sprayer bar calibration, that type of stuff to help people gain some familiarity. And also, too, when you come, I'll be giving out some supplies for those that are able. So Friday, I'll be going up and filling up the truck with some of the typical packets. I'll also be at spring conference this year for IEA, and so I'll be delivering some catch folks southern part of the state. And for those that I miss either at those two venues, then we're going to mail them to you. So that's the two things I have, Jeff. And thank you very much, so guys. The key one though is if you've not heard from me or didn't get the email from Friday, then reach out to me directly, please.
Thank you, Scott.